Hello and welcome once again to episode 220 of Superconnectivity.
120.
120. That was the one. I know this is from the future, Phil. We're going to talk about what Marvel will be a year from now when Otto Octavius is the one true super Spider-Man and Hydra Cap is the beloved leader of all of the Marvel Universe. Everyone has said, oh yeah, that's the good Hydra. We like them. They're cool. No, this is episode 120. Let's jump back to the past. This is welcome to episode 120 of Superconnectivity. You know, we didn't used to number these, folks, so this idea that we now have numbers for what episode it is, it's a little confusing to us who... You know, we as Southgate Media podcasters, we've always been kind of seat of our pants kind of guys, but Rob, quite frankly, he says, hey, let's have some order, let's have some discipline. Let's be a network of professional podcasters. And
it's kind of my idea, but okay.
Well, okay, yeah, well, that too. You know, Phil and Rob, you know. I embrace professionalism. I am a hardcore professional myself. You know, I work in an office. I like that idea of order and structure, and let's know where we're going tomorrow, today, because I think that's the best. But anyway, so this is episode 120 of Superconnectivity. Phil, have you seen the morning papers? Let's just talk random speculation about Generations. Shall we, Phil?
Oh, right.
Okay, so this is our big teaser. The big teaser for Generations. And it's a picture and nothing else. But you know what? A picture is worth 1,000 words, and 1,000 words is about one podcast. So I think we're going to be able to talk almost everything we need to say this episode about this one picture. So, Phil, what strikes you most about this picture?
That they've gone, they're basically giving you, you know, here's the original heroes, here's the new generation, and it's just like, okay, are we going to get like a coming together? Or are we going to get some kind of reboot where you have like legacy characters now, like DC kind of had with like the Flash and Kid Flash and everything? Or, like I said, are they going to separate them entirely? Are we going to get two different universes?
See, I wonder about... here's my thing with Marvel. And I do think this is the thing with Marvel. I don't... see, DC embraced multiple universes very early on.
Mm-hmm.
And almost accidentally. In the way that I think most comic books are... Everything that evolves in comic books, I think, is almost always really completely accidental. I don't think anyone sets out to say, hey, we're going to do this and this and this and this. I think that what happens is this and this and this happens, and then somewhere along the line, another writer says, well, you know, if we do that, you know, basically, if you completely decide that there's a different Flash in a different universe with no previous Flash, you know, that means that there's another universe where the other Flash is, and now I have to write a story called Flash of Two Worlds. You know, that's what happens. That's what happens, is that you had, in DC, you had the Golden Age, and then they just said, well, we'll just do everything again. Let's just do, well, a Just Imagine story, you know, in the way that Stan Lee did, like, just imagine that this character, but created by someone completely different. And so you had Flash, but, so here's Flash's powers, what story are you going to tell? And they basically retold the original origin, but they had a different guy. But then, you know, they said, well, here's Green Lantern. What's your story? And said, well, let's tell a completely different story, you know. And Superman and Batman, they said, well, those are too good of stories. We're just leaving them exactly where they are. We're not even going to acknowledge that there's been a universal shift. And that's DC. But because DC embraced that idea of multiple universes, when they came to that multiple universe, everything worked out just fine. I don't think that Marvel, at this point in its history, can have another universe. And just to give you an example, over in DC right now, you have the Hanna-Barbera verse at DC. that is a separate, complete universe in the DC imprint ongoing. We have the Flintstones. We have Johnny Quest. We're going to have Snagglepuss. And are these three different universes? Are they a unified Hanna-Barbera verse? We don't know yet, but it's a different concept, you know. And I think you can get away with that much easier at DC, whereas when you get to Marvel, if you're going to do that, if you're going to have a spectacular Spider-Ham, then at some point someone says, well, if we're going to do a Spider-Verse crossover, we've got to say the Funny Animal universe is 100% a part of our universe, and we've got to bring Spider-Ham into it. We've got to have a dark and gritty Spider-Ham reboot.
But, I mean, I know what you're saying about the multiverse. It's been more of like a DC thing, but when you think about it, this way they can keep multiple versions of characters. They can do multiple books, Charlie, because remember that great cosmic force.
Yes. And to your argument, Phil, they have already established this in two ways.
Yes.
First, they broke away MC2 and said MC2 is its own thing, separate from everyone. Which is why MC2 did not get destroyed in the incursions. Second, and when we came back from the incursions, we had Renew Your Vows. Renew Your Vows is a separate omniverse, complete and totally on its own. So in that sense, Marvel has set that groundwork for what you're describing, Phil. I just think that when you do it line-wide, it's a lot harder.
Mm-hmm.
Because for what it's worth, MC2 was originally that. MC2 was, let's look at a universe that is separate from the Marvel universe, where things unfolded differently, where this is the universe we're dealing with. And in taking that on, I think that in many ways, Marvel realized that was not a sellable point. Now, maybe you can argue that the market has changed, that you have essentially a Zemification of the comic book market. For those who remember, Zima was this early kind of semi-sweet flavored malt liquor that came out in the late 90s, or even maybe the mid-90s. Before, Smirnoff Ice and all these other, basically, alcoholic soda pops came out. So Zima came and went and was tossed aside. But then afterwards, all these other people came back and produced this type of alcohol. Now, what you can say is that Marvel, having that they have established their own Zimas, if you will, that they can come back and say, now we're going to have our Zima universes. And again, to go to DC, DC has that. DC has its Hanna-Barbera verse. DC has its alternate universes that are completely separate from the DC universe, but they can have references therein. It was a recent point, because of course there's been a lot of talk about Kamandi, the last human boy. Which is an old Kirby property. In that universe, it was suggested that the universe Kamandi lived in the future was actually the DC universe, and you actually had you had like a group of gorillas that worshipped an old Superman costume because they believed in the power of the god of Superman, and then it was later revealed or suggested that yes, in fact, Kamandi existed in that Twilight of the Gods universe, where all the gods had been destroyed, all the superheroes had been destroyed, and the animals had evolved, but they still had those references. And, it's interesting, but could they do that? Yeah, absolutely, Phil, they could do it. Now, what my crazed fan theory is the point of Generations is to just completely say, no more old line heroes. That the sliding of time has broken. And let me give you a take on this. Now, one of the keys of our modern storytelling is the youthening of Cap by Kobik. Now imagine if stuff that happens with the Ultimates, stuff that happens with Kobik, stuff that happens with Secret Empire, that space-time differential gets broken by Kobik. Perhaps as Kobik finally reunites all the Beyonders into the one outside.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as a part of that, Steve ages and gets pushed back in time. That all time gets restructured in a way that would allow for things to have been progressing appropriately. And then we start with our new line of heroes, our new Thor, our new Cap, our new Nova, our new Hulk. Because in the resetting of the universe, the legacy characters take hold. And yeah, I know on some level everyone wants to say, but no, it's the actual legacy, it's the actual original characters that people want. I think there may be an argument that says no, that's not. And for what it's worth, one of the biggest things that jumped out at me in the line of new heroes, there are no white Anglo-Saxon males among them.
I don't think there's any white. Then we talk about there's no straight up white people at all.
Well, I mean, okay. This is a very complex question, which is about white Hispanics, and that is a classification. Because there's a white non-Hispanic. Because there's a lot of Hispanic people who are white, or who consider themselves white. They say, I'm descendant of European Spanish stock, and and they are of pale skin. And quite frankly, if Italians from Sicily can classify themselves as white, why should a Hispanic from Mexico who is lighter skinned not classify himself as white? Now, this gets into this entire the entire basic racism of the color-coded classification system of race. There is no white race. There's no such thing as being white. Mm-hmm. But that groups who, for political power, sought to codify whiteness, described it as such. It's a very complex issue. But basically, I'm forgetting his name now. Sam, what's his last name? Nova.
Alexander.
Sam Alexander, which is not particularly a Hispanic name. But I guess his mom is Hispanic.
His mom is the Hispanic one, I believe, yes.
Yeah, but he, and so he, much like my kids, they generally speaking read white. My kids, my wife is African American. My kids very much read as white, which is, what it is. And Sam in that way can read white or he can read Hispanic. But the fact of the matter is that every person in that secondary line, everybody in that generational line, is not a classically white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male. And I think there's a statement to be made in that. This idea that Marvel is committing to this idea that our characters at least are diverse. Whether we're talking historically, whether we're talking momentarily, our characters are diverse. And to that extent, I think that's where they want to go. This is a thing I think. I do think that Disney thinks further than tomorrow. I think Disney sits there and doesn't say, well, what's going to make money today? I kind of think whoever is in charge of Disney is not thinking about that short term, but thinking about that long term. And I think when they looked at their superhero list, they said, let's make it look more like the people who are out there able and interested in buying our books. Because for what it's worth, the idea that, there are people of other races aside from white and other genders aside from male who want to read your books is pretty obvious. But it is something that, for whatever reason, the industry has shunned. And right now, I think that Marvel is embracing it. pretty hardcore and pretty directly. Now, I'm not going to say that DC isn't embracing it. I think DC has a lot of new characters of that Ms. Marvel vein who are of a group that maybe has been very unrepresented. But I do think that DC kind of falls flat in the question of, are these the characters that people look to? When you look at the success of a character like Ms. Marvel, I think that you kind of hit into something that I think a lot of comic book companies would love to recreate. And I think they all are trying to recreate that. But I think they are all also maybe not hitting that point. I don't know. What do you think, Phil?
I don't know. I kind of like the direction DC's taking right now, but do you think with the name Generations, are they gonna like kind of maybe reshuffle the timeline? Maybe we're gonna see some of these original heroes maybe age a little bit, so they're kind of like the elder statesmen, like maybe they're a few, like 5 years from retiring, and we get like these younger heroes ready to replace them.
Well, here's what I'll say. Do you remember Star Trek Generations?
Yes.
Yeah, and you remember what that basic plotline was?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was basically, let's kill Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make sure all the old heroes are dead, so that now we can explore our new next generation of heroes.
Yeah, but I mean, you really think they would kill off all those old heroes, though?
Well, for what it's worth, Captain Marvel's already dead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like Steve Rogers and Clint Barton, and who else was on there? The original Thor.
Well, it's not so much that they'd be dead, and of course Thor isn't going to die, but maybe Thor ascends. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, so Hawkeye doesn't die, but maybe we start to acknowledge how old Hawkeye is. Maybe we start to acknowledge how old Black Widow is.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we have these heroes stepping back and letting the next group step forward, And, maybe we get our old man Cap back. And maybe we get him back to where he was. Or maybe he's dead because, let's face it, being Cap is a very long, drawn-out process. And maybe we get Sharon Carter as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. If we can't have Maria Hill, I would love to have Sharon Carter. I get, it's like this. I look at what they put out there, and I'm always wrong. So I'm not going to deny that I'm not always wrong. But I do look at it and I say, you're trying to tell us something. And it comes on the heels of Secret Empire, which we know is very much about universe reconstruction. Almost done. And we very much know that, quite frankly, a character like Kobik is, by their nature, going to be one who's undoing the universe. Because they undid the universe to start, and then the universe is going to be undone later. The real question is what exactly gets undone? Because right now we see in the Marvel universe, we see that eternity is chained. We know that heroes and villains are in weird new situations. We know that, quite frankly, Doctor Doom wants to be a hero. And I still think the Infamous 4 is coming. I read the previews every week in CBR. So I know that the next episode of Infamous Iron Man is told largely from Benjamin Grimm's perspective. And so my current thinking on the Infamous 4 is that it's going to be Doom and Mad Thinker and Diablo trying to fix things with Ben sort of there to keep them honest, to say, okay, look, I'm going to support you in being the Infamous 4, but understand, I'm the guy who's beaten every single one of you to a pulp repeatedly throughout the years, and I'm going to continue to do so if I think you step out of line. Mm-hmm. So that's my new take on the Infamous 4. And then, of course, we have, for those who haven't read the previews yet, I'm going to give a big spoiler alert. Phil, do you want to know what happens next week in Captain America?
Sure.
Steve Rogers. Who do you think Taskmaster, now that he knows that Cap is Hydra, reaches out to?
The Red Skull?
No. Where's the profit in that, dealing with the Red Skull? He controls your mind. No one wants to deal with the Red Skull. No. Who has the most to gain from knowing that Cap is Hydra? Who just lost their job?
Cap. Maria Hill.
Yes. So he approaches Maria Hill with this data. And that's the opening of that book. I don't know what happens next, but that's the opening. And as I've said, I mean, I think the one thing that the MC universe right now is missing as we go into the fourth stage is Colby Smulders as Maria Hill as the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. That is what is going to make that a viable and strong and great force. I like Phil Coulson, but he is a soldier. He's not the director. The director needs to be someone who can handle more than just getting in the field and kicking people or shooting people or fighting people. The director has to be the one deciding who gets punched and why. You know, anyone can go. Here's the thing: anyone can go and punch a Nazi. The question isn't, do you punch a Nazi? It's a question, do you punch the right Nazi at the right time that makes punching that Nazi a valuable choice for the rest of the world?
Mm-hmm.
You know, or you know, and that is the kind of questions that Maria Hill has to grapple with. And honestly, I am so much more intrigued with Maria Hill right now as a character than I think anyone else in the Marvel Universe. Since she basically got ran out of office by a trumped-up thing, you know, to some extent, you know, engineered by the Red Skull, and yeah, granted, she went along with it. But I think there's a grand story to be told there with regard to Maria Hill. And that's who I most want to see Marvel push forward. I kind of think sometimes Marvel looks at what everyone wants to read and then writes stories about those characters, which I can't say is the wrong business model. But I can say that artistically, I think that you can have a better business model if you think about what's the next story that might organically evolve. And I think right now, as we look at the Marvel Universe, the Maria Hill story is the story you want to watch for. To the extent where I'm going to tell you right now, if they had a Maria Hill Director of S.H.I.E.L.D. series, I'm going to put that poll, if they tease it this next week, I'm going to put it on my poll list next Wednesday. Because I think that is such a strong concept. You know, and the fact that in the TV universe we haven't had Maria Hill back in so long, you know, Colby Smulders isn't doing anything. Colby Smulders absolutely will do Maria Hill on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. when you need her. And if you want to make her a series regular as Director Hill, I can pretty much guarantee Colby Smulders is going to be available. She doesn't have another gig pending. She wants to do movies. Everyone wants to do movies, and that's what summer hiatuses are for. But I really think that that's what if Marvel is going to take Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. to a third series, that's what they need. They need to bring Colby Smulders in as Maria Hill, as the boss of all bosses, who is not going to take Phil Coulson's fanboy stuff and is going to say, we are running in a clandestine organization to protect the world. There are threats that you don't even know about, and I'm here to help you control them. And that's what they want to see. I don't know. What do you want to see, Phil?
I like your whole Maria Hill thing. Like we were talking about on Marvel Roundup. I just wonder if the movie side has her locked up for some reason. Because I don't see, like you were saying, I don't see another reason why she wouldn't do it. Why they wouldn't bring her in unless Disney's saying no. We don't want to intermingle those too much, like the movie actors and the TV side.
Well, here's what I'll say. I don't think it was ever Disney. I think it was always Feige and Perlmutter.
Yeah.
I think that Feige and Perlmutter got off on the wrong foot and absolutely had this antagonistic relationship that, for what it's worth, eventually led to, negative outcomes for the whole, Marvel Cinematic Universe and its television subsidiaries. And I think we are finally in a place where now that Feige is his own fiefdom, and I think I'm trying to remember who's in charge of the Marvel Television Universe right now. Is it Slott? Is it Dan Slott? Or is it... It's not Quesada, I know that. But whoever is in charge, he's one of those writers I've never really been a fan of. But but it's another creative who's in charge. And now instead of Feige going to Perlmutter, it's now Feige going to the other creative and them talking back and forth. And I think that gives a better structure to the universe, which I think we've seen in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. so far this season. I think it's a lot more interconnected, and I'm very interested in where it's going to go. And I think that because for what it's worth, it's not like they've been using Colby Smulders in the movies. She had maybe 2-3 lines in Age of Ultron.
It wasn't much. Yeah,
it wasn't much. She's under contract and she does it, but the fact of the matter is that she's not doing much. It would be much more practical to put her back in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. And honestly, I think if you put Colby Smulders there, now maybe Colby's asking too much. Maybe Colby is saying, I don't want to go back to TV now that I'm in movies. But in all honesty, if I was Colby's agent, I would say, look, you haven't had the success that other actresses have had walking off of a hit TV series. You have the Marvel Cinematic Universe basically standing there saying, here is a character for you that you can take through TV and movies at your leisure and at our running pleasure. And she's going to say no? I think that really, that is where we need to be with the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe. And for what it's worth, I'm not opposed to them introducing a Hydra Cap. So... that might be interesting too. If in Infinity War there's a cosmic cube, the idea of, if in Infinity War we have Red Skull come back, maybe he communicates with a cosmic cube, and then we get Hydra Cap in the cinematic universe. I think we can all agree that would be pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to talk about tonight, Phil?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, I don't want to go too long because we had a really long Marvel roundup this week. So we want to keep Superconnectivity short but sweet. But if you say, hey, why didn't you talk about this important issue in the comic book, television, or otherwise genre fiction universe? You know what? Why don't you tell us how to do our jobs and write to us? And if you'd like to do so, you can do that at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com or superconnectivityblog, all one word, at gmail.com. And Phil, quite frankly, since that's way too long for them to remember, because our audience, not that bright, let's be honest here, I'm insulting you so that you'll want to prove me wrong. You see, it's a very clever marketing ploy there. But yes, prove me wrong. Show me how smart you are. Write us a letter. But Phil, if they can't remember how to spell superconnectivityblog@gmail.com, how can they reach you?
Well, they can reach me at nightwingpdp@gmail.com. On Twitter, I am at nightwingpdp. And you can also, Superconnectivity has a Facebook page, facebook.com/superconnectivitypodcast. And our Twitter is at superconnectpod. And remember, the views of Charlie Esser do not reflect the views of the Nuff Said podcast.
Or the Southgate Media Empire. Okay. So, Phil, I think that's all our connections for this week. Please connect with us again. Good night.